A little hot in here.
Yeah.
Questions? Bob Tkacz and then Becky Moore.
Bob Tkacz for the Legislative Digest and Laws for the Sea.
Many of us see Bob on a daily basis in the halls of the Capitol. But did you know that Bob has been covering the Alaska legislature since 1990? Since the 1990 session, and has specialized in reporting on Alaska and Pacific fisheries and the seafood industry since then. Bob is also the writer and publisher of Laws of the Sea, which focuses on seafood and fisheries issues in the Alaska legislature. Additionally, Bob has written articles for magazines, some notable magazines such as Alaska Commercial Fisherman, the Alaska Fisherman's Journal, and the Fisherman's News. Currently he's writing for the Pacific or Fish Politics column in the Pacific Fishing magazine. And this is a unique opportunity. You see Bob in the hallways and he's always asking the questions. When he finishes his presentation, we're going to be able to ask him questions for a change. So Bob, go right ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming. People are hungry for knowledge rather than food. And also, this is very informal. It's about change as well as the specifics of fish farming. So here we go.
Bob, a question for Senator Ellis, please. You mentioned that the Democratic caucus did not allow a single committee chairman to kill another bill. That suggests you allowed a single committee chairman to kill this one, or why could you not do the same thing with the cruise ship bill as you did with the other one you mentioned?
You're so didactic.
No, you misunderstood me.
It's not the first time, but Governor, given that the session is wide open in terms of introducing bills, should the legislature try to craft a statute to go along with the constitutional amendment on subsistence? When Julie Kitko was testifying at the House Resource hearing yesterday, she said that would make the Native community feel a lot more secure as opposed to just being under the broad terms of an amendment. Is that something they could or should try taking up now?
They certainly could, and I think in reference perhaps if the House were to put an amendment over into the Senate early, just as a starting point, they could then begin working on some draft legislation, and I think that's been considered, and I think that might be a step. It's not the only way to handle it. Attorney General, you've been involved in that a lot. Is that somewhere along?
Absolutely. We're prepared to deal with statutes.
Do you have draft statutes available, sir?
We do not yet. That is to say, we have draft statutes. We do not have them available.
I didn't mean to us, of course.
Oh, I'm surprised.
There's draft statutes that have been worked on, and they've been available to you ever since that we had them worked out a number of years ago, back in, I think it was 97.
Okay. Governor, yesterday your press secretary brought down a copy of Commissioner Miller's.
Is that cartoon you're bringing up?
No, this is another joke.
I let that cartoon get a little publicity. I was hoping that.
Well, actually, I'm curious if there's a connection. The memo from Commissioner Miller said that all departments were directed to cancel all of their subscriptions to publications.
Yeah, we're going to save a couple $1 million.
Is that the same kind of thing you did at the start of the administration to kind of do a general review?
We just got the bill.
But I mean, is it a general review of what the state should and shouldn't be subscribing to, or is it you don't want to read anymore?
Oh no, we read all your stuff.
Sure you do.
But we can, if we want to read it, we can buy it.
Who's that?
I don't know. Somebody must have seen the cartoon.
So there's no connection between the cartoon and the killing the subscriptions.
Well, no, it's not something that might not be done.
Well, many people say it was a pretty bad idea to repeal the law, if not to
Then
suspend
they'd
the
have
tax.
they should go back and talk to the legislature that repealed it.
Well, many of the people who were here when it was repealed said it was a bad idea.
Well, they repealed it, so. And in any event, we're down to a situation where we are faced with the prospects of a sales tax, 3% year-round, and if that's what the legislature passes, I'll support it. Okay?
Do you have any?
Talk with the Senate leadership about the sales tax?
Well, we've been talking all the time.
Is it your sense that they would support that?
Oh, yeah, that's generally my sense. Of course, we're still working on it.
Governor,
You know, it's still under review, and it's, yeah, go ahead.
if the legislature were to send you an income tax, would you have any choice but to accept it, given the fiscal situation?
Well, I don't think that's likely to occur, so,
What kind of odds are you giving on passage of sales tax this year?
well, let's wait and see. I'm not here to make odds. You can go down to your pull tab operator and
But
try
you're
the odds
taxing us
down
if
there. I'm taxing him too. Okay. See ya.
For whoever would like to start commenting, between HB 191, the Coastal Zone Bill, HB 86, and a couple other ones, it seemed to be the biggest transfer of power from a local government to a central government really since 1990, when the state lost control of subsistence management. Why was that necessary to do? These local governments, particularly in the case of the Coastal Zone Bill, were not anti-development, wild-eyed environmentalists. Why were these things necessary when for years your majority has preached that government is best when it's most local?
Well, Bob, I don't think it was a big transfer of power away from the local governments at all. What it was a clarification of the process. I think if you look at 191, it just asks for those communities that have a coastal zone district, that their local enforceable policies be clear and concise. That it not just be a restatement of the state statutes and regulatory process. That there's certain things that the state's in charge of, and then if the local government wants to add on, that's fine, as long as those local enforceable policies are clear and concise. If you want to attract that private sector capital for development of projects, and a person is faced with a local enforceable policy that says the waters in our community shall be maintained as pristine, what does that mean? Are we talking parts per billion? What are we talking about? Do you want certain setbacks? You need to be more specific so that a person that is proposing has some idea what they're up against. And then once they go through that very lengthy process, that they're assured that if they get all their permits, they're able to go forward with their project.
What did the Democrats do or try to do, both in the shorter term and the longer term, to close the fiscal gap during this session?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question.
Carbon credits.
Carbon sequestration.
What did the rest of the Democrats do?
Well, the other thing, we talked about the tariff. The tariff would have been a big boost. We put down a proposal that would have shuffled state assets around, the sale of Student Loan Corporation to HFC. We were some of the lead agencies on the tobacco...
Cigarette tax.
Cigarette tax, what do you call it?
Stamp.
We had all kinds of ideas. What other ones?
Solid permitting proposals, too.
The solid permitting waste, we did all kinds of things, but they were rejected. And ours, at least, some of them got to be voted on.
Is there an agreement in the Senate majority regarding
we haven't had a conversation.
These types?
Yeah, we have not had a conversation on the issue.
Senator, did you mean to say you would start an initiative, no bill is passed, or you
No, I
just
said
believe
there will
one?
be an initiative.
Right, but you're not planning to start one if it does not.
I didn't say that. I said there will
Well, I'm
be an
asking you
initiative.
that. I'm asking you that.
I am a supporter of that, of getting something done on this issue.
But the talk within the state, aside from the whole stimulus package, is that in the next few years we're likely to be facing some very tough times before natural gas starts to flow. What's the difference between laying people off who have been paid by temporary federal money or laying people off who are paid by state funds that we no longer have?
Well, the principle that we've applied from day one has been sustainability and building a state budget, even using some federal funds at the very beginning with sustainability in mind. It doesn't make sense to us to get Alaska's expectations high that they're going to have these jobs, that government growth and programs will be seen by all of them, and then we're going to continue to do that. I don't think that is fair, and that's not transparency in long-term budgeting either, so we don't want to participate in that.
The public can't understand that this is a temporary stimulus package designed to get us out of
That's what
really
we're
bad
reminding
times.
everybody is every dollar that we accept from the feds is it's got to be seen as a temporary dollar. And you go right to the heart of it, Bob, when what you're suggesting that there is, Alaskans, are you ready for programmatic increases that would result from taking more of these dollars? Are you ready to sustain those and pick up the tab when the feds say, there, you're on your own, you've created these increases, and pay for them yourself?
You seem to be saying Alaskans would say no, they're not ready to realize that.
I believe that in many of these areas, Alaska would say, no, we can't afford it. The price of a barrel is too low. Other questions?
Governor, did
Yeah.
you accept?
Weren't his own misrepresentations a bigger problem for the legislature?
I'm just having referred to those who purposefully misrepresented actions that perhaps he had taken. Obviously, he hadn't taken them, but they claimed to take. That's what I was referring to in my comments.
Could you respond to Pat's question, though? The Attorney General was quoted saying it didn't matter whether the legislature passed the law or words to that effect, and then the day later he denied making that statement.
See, you say words to that effect. It's subjective.
You don't have the
It's
exact quote,
right,
but he
exactly.
said
So
it
unless
wasn't
you have the
important.
exact quote, I'm not going to speculate on your interpretation of what it is that he said. I'll let my statement stand.
Said that played a role in their decision.
So what's your question?
Do you think it did? I mean, wasn't that a bigger problem than what the public was saying about him?
I think a great problem was public lies that were told about Mr. Ross became a problem and tough for him to have opportunity to answer and to correct.
Was he not?
Go ahead.
Just what were those lies?
Oh, if you guys didn't read them or hear about them, I'd be surprised. Lies concerning he being engaged in for instance, a machine gun shoot on somebody's property somewhere down in Seward, and there were witnesses to such a thing, and he had never been there. That's just one example. Go ahead, Bob. You had a question.
I think you probably answered it as much as you're going to, Governor.
Idea, as I said, I'm not prepared to comment when I've only read the news stories about it, haven't read the task force, so I can't tell you.
Well, the 2 points you mentioned are both federal initiatives, the Coast Guard and the Law of the Sea. The goal.
But the state has a say in it because we're impacted by federal law and federal actions surrounding us.
But the goal of the Northern Waters Commission to give the state kind of a hands-on participation in management, not facility construction, but actual management of fisheries or whatever kind of development goes on there. Is that?
Well, like I
are
said,
you pursuing that otherwise?
I'm going to read it before I comment, Bob. I'm not prepared to take one person's characterization of a part of it or all of it without reading it. Go ahead.
Governor, you lost two of your confirmees, your appointees in the confirmation hearings today, or this session. One of those was Nancy Bienvenu. She was not qualified under the letter of the law to be on the Board of Nursing, but your news release said afterwards that she was qualified. How do you justify that? She didn't have the...
Well, I'll let her resume speak for itself, and
well, I'd like
tied
you to speak
with
for her. You
it.
appointed her.
And
She's
tied
not
with
here to
it.
speak for herself.
Well,
She didn't have the qualifications. She didn't have the time practicing as a nurse immediately before the appointment that the law calls for. You're a lawyer, so I assume you respect the letter of the law. How was she qualified for that job?
Bob, I'm not going to go down the road of arguing that. I'm going to go find another.
I'm not asking for an argument. I'm asking for an explanation.
No, you're not. Let's go on. Who else wants to ask a question?
You're not answering the questions again.
Who else wants to ask a question?
Senator, on the same issue. How much gravitas or how much respect is the U.S. going to get from a person called our ambassador instead of representative if the U.S. still hasn't ratified the Law of the Sea Treaty and we don't even have the ability to take part in the Arctic Council directly in any of the land claim processes?
Well,
and when do you think the Senate's going to get around to doing that?
we can have people in the right positions. We can put resources towards Arctic initiatives and fill out the implementation plan. But I agree with you, Bob. The fact that we have failed to ratify the Law of the Sea Treaty is still an issue amongst the other nations in the Arctic and around the world who are looking at the United States and saying, we don't understand why you have failed to accede to the treaty.
Thank you, Senator. I guess kind of along those same lines, I had an interview with Representative Osterman last week, and he said there are quietly going on behind closed doors conversations among legislators looking for new revenue sources or potential sources. Have any of you been in those conversations, and have you identified any possible new revenue sources? Not to use the word taxes, unless you want to.
Bob, that conversation's not going on behind my closed door. I don't think that's premature to be thinking that way, because again, I think most of us feel like the oil tax reform bill is going to work, and we are going to have more production. And fortunately, we have quite a bit in savings, so we can ride this out for several more years.
A decade?
I'm sorry?
A decade? Governor's got no new oil revenue coming in for about a decade.
Well, again, the Department of Revenue has got to be conservative in their forecasts. We think we'll see it before a decade, but certainly we have enough in our savings, and if we watch our spending, we could ride out a decade.
Okay. All right, thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Senator Hudgens, you have a question?
Just a comment. I told Bob, I'm an admirer of his over time. Had to kind of grow with me a little bit, but in any event, I told Bob last night about 2 o'clock, I heard the announcement that this was going to happen, I was going to come see it. And it was, number one, to see the fish and the fish story. Number two, though, was Bob has a reputation for asking hard questions in forums like this, and I just wanted to see if people were really civil to him or not. And I congratulate him for his presentation. So congratulations, Bob.
Thank you, Senator.
Bob would not let go, and he would go forever. And yeah, it did get a little annoying every once in a while, but the fact is that he came closer to really doing the job that we all ought to be doing than a lot of people who say, okay, thank you, and hang up.
This is just absolutely adorable. Looks like something James Bond would have.
Yeah. You should see my car, the ejection seat.
Hey, you know what? Speaking of car, someone called the police and wanted my car towed because they don't think I move it enough, apparently.